somebody who I've met personally at my first conference, actually, where I was talking. His name is Dr. Bryce Stewart. He's been affiliated with the University of York for over 16 years, but has recently started a new position as associate professor at the University of Plymouth, where he represents the MBA, the Marine Biological Association. I'll hold it quick with my background information because I think it's so much incredible work he has done, he's still doing, and I'm as well really looking forward to what out of his knowledge box he will share us today. So yeah, Bryce is a marine ecologist and fisheries biologist. He has worked in multiple ranges of tropical coral reefs and the deep sea, but as well in estuaries. And his recent work, which I remember, is that he was involved a lot in the Brexit and how UK fisheries are affected by it and the marine environment in general, and as well how to engage with the government and the stakeholders. So just to keep it short, I could continue probably for another 5 more minutes. I would like to introduce our VIP talk and a warm welcome, Bryce.
Tristan, great to be here. Yeah, thanks so much for the invitation. Right, I'll just get my talk up on screen. Okay, can everybody see that all right?
Yes, perfect.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, yeah, well, thanks for that introduction. So I'm probably slightly preaching to the converted here, but I'm just going to tell a few stories from my sort of career as a marine scientist. So sort of following on from that video that we saw earlier, and also talk about the importance of partnerships. So you guys have really set me up quite nicely. So, as Tristan said, I am currently largely based at the Marine Biological Association in Plymouth, also part-time at the University of Plymouth. Anyone wants to follow me on Twitter, I'm quite active there. So, yeah, please do. So, my take-home message really is that management and conservation of the ocean is all about people. So I think it's important to remember that, because if it wasn't for us, the ocean would be absolutely fine, right? It's been doing its thing for hundreds of millions of years. Marine life is evolving, it's going extinct, it's changing all the time. But we've come in, particularly in the last, well, probably 50 years in particular, and really disrupted things. And this is why we need to do a better job at managing human activities, and particularly engaging people more in that process. So my first story is from the Isle of Man. And so I actually moved here when I was an ECOP, like many of you. I just finished my PhD in Australia on coral reef fish. And I moved to the UK for personal reasons. And I had a project there as a postdoc to work on scallops. And now the Isle of Man is a great place to work on scallops because all of these pink areas here are scallop fishing grounds. So for those who don't know, the Isle of Man is in between England, Scotland, and Ireland, so in the middle of the Irish Sea. But all of those pink areas were dredged for scallops, and dredging for scallops can be quite destructive to, particularly to vulnerable marine habitats. So back in 1989, the Marine Lab there set up this very small experimental protected area which banned dredging for scallops in that area. And if we look down here, this is the result of dive surveys during that sort of period from when the protected area or closed area was set up until 1999, which is when I arrived. And you can see it's not really done very much. And the big problem was that illegal fishing was just rife. So this is a real photo of a fisherman taken from shore, just blatantly fishing in the protected area. And my boss at the time said, well, it's not really a protected area, it's just a slightly less fished area. And that wasn't the idea. And he said to me, it'd be great if you could sort that out. That was a little bit overwhelming, having just finished my PhD in another country. But anyway, I got together with various other people, and we came up with various other approaches to try and do this. So working with the government, they put in stronger enforcement of the area, they increased the fines, they changed the regulations, so people had to keep their gear on board if they went through. We put marker buoys around the protected area, and they started satellite monitoring the vessels as well. So this was all pretty intense, pretty costly, both in terms of time and money. The other thing, though, that happened was we started to work with fishermen more. Now, this was a little bit unexpected. It wasn't planned, but the university that I worked for decided our research vessel was too expensive, and so they sold it. And we were quite upset at the time, and we said, what are we supposed to do? You know, we run a marine research program. And the message back was, well, you'll just have to charter fishing boats. So that's what we did. Turned out to be the best thing that ever happened. So even on the end of the first day, the skipper of the boat we were on said to me, "You guys actually work quite hard, don't you?" And I think actually from talking to you, we both want the same thing. We want long-term sustainable fisheries. I mean, this was just music to my ears. So, of course, of all of these things, which were all important, working with fishermen was by far the most important. And that really grew from then on. And so what happened was the fishermen knew why we had this protected area. They became convinced it was quite important. If any of their friends fished in there illegally, they convinced them not to. And in terms of the densities of scallops and much other marine life, there was this explosion basically from that point on. And actually, if we fast forward the situation more recently, that tiny protected area off the Isle of Man has really inspired a complete change in the management of the waters around there. So now you can see this complete network of different marine nature reserves, and actually a fishery zone where they use real-time closures as well to manage their fishery. So that was a great success story to be part of, and it really inspired me and informed me going forward. The next story is from the Isle of Arran. So the Isle of Arran is actually not that far from the Isle of Man, but it's just off the west coast of Scotland. And this is a really interesting story because Scotland's first no-take zone, or highly protected area, was set up there in 2008. But it only happened because of the local community, particularly these two guys, Howard Wood and Don McNeish, who were local scuba divers, not marine scientists. Howard ran a garden centre. Don's an engineer, but they had seen firsthand the damage that overfishing had caused in their local environment, and they really had a fantastic brainwave that they weren't going to be able to do this by themselves. They weren't going to be able to change things by themselves. So they set up the Community of Arran Seabed Trust to engage the local community. And they were fantastically successful at doing that. It still took about 12 or 13 years since they got the idea of setting up a protected area before it actually happened, but they did get there in the end. And uniquely, this was designed to benefit both fisheries and conservation as well. So it's already a great success story, but it gets much better. So off the back of that first no-take zone here, which is this red area here, they now have a complete network, again, a bit like the Isle of Man, of these different levels of protection, which are designed to offer, in some cases, very high levels of protection, but also to allow sustainable fishing as well. And this really came about because back in 2010, when I was at the University of York, myself and my students started working closely with Coast on Arran, and started collecting the scientific data that they needed to actually get even more protection for their local environment. And then it continues. So from there, this is sort of all the well, it's actually not even an up-to-date summary of what we've done. We've done quite a lot more since then, but this is from a paper called Marine Conservation Begins at Home, published in 2020. The sort of key things in these protected areas is we saw overall habitat recovery in terms of, things growing on the seabed, merle and sponges and hydroids, but we also saw increases of commercial species like scallops and lobsters, and good evidence as well that the protected areas were reseeding the areas around and actually supporting fisheries in that way. But But yeah, perhaps even more important is the inspiration that this story provided. So this has happened in various different ways, and I'll just highlight two of them. One is that one of those founders, Howard Wood, was given an OBE and also won the Goldman Environment Prize, which is a very prestigious grassroots conservation prize in the United States. This allowed them to set up a marine education interpretation center called the Octopus Center for members of the public. Arran gets a lot of tourists and visitors, so this was really key, and they get tens of thousands of people going through the doors of this place every year. Even my kids here are slightly interested in conservation. Any parent knows it's pretty hard to get your kids interested in your work, so I figure they're doing a pretty good job. But also, what they did was they inspired other communities around Scotland in particular, and in fact many others in other parts of the world, but particularly in Scotland, to set up what was called the Coastal Communities Network. So this began with just a few other like-minded coastal communities saying, we want to sort of replicate what happened in Arran. And now it's up to 25 other organizations around the UK. And they're all different. They're all doing their own things appropriate to their local environment, their local community. But, you know, and each one of those you could tell fantastic stories about. So it's a really great example of how, you know, from small things, in this case, the inspiration, motivation of two guys has led to this massive change on a national scale. My final story is a much more recent one, and this is called Project Pollock. This one's a little bit different. So Pollock is quite an important recreational and commercially fish species that's landed for consumption and for sport as well, all over the Northeast Atlantic. But unfortunately, there's been what appears to be quite a dramatic drop in commercial landings and government surveys in recent years. So this is what this graph here shows, and you know, it looks pretty concerning. However, the data that this pattern was based on is actually quite limited, and the stock surveys weren't done particularly well. They weren't really targeted at this species, even though this was actually quite important. However, all the same, the government at the start of this year said to the fishermen that they were going to set the quota at 0. So they were only allowed to catch a very small amount of this species as bycatch. So weren't allowed to target it anymore. And this has really caused a lot of upset. This is just one headline of many about the devastation that it's had for local fishing communities. Interestingly, just last night, the government announced a compensation scheme for these fishermen. However, we got together, myself and a bunch of other scientists and angling groups as well, to actually try and change this situation, actually well before the government decision was made. Fishermen, recreational fishermen in particular, come to us and said, there's something going on with this stock. It's declining, the fish are getting smaller. We need to know more about this. The government surveys are not up to scratch. And so actually we teamed up about 18 months ago now with recreational charter fishing boats. So these are boats who take paying customers, sort of 8 or 10 anglers out to sea. And they've been collecting data for us ever since then through what we call Project Pollock, or the Pollock Fisheries Industry Science Partnership. So this project's sort of midway at the moment. It's happening. These numbers are changing every day. But just to sort of give you a flavor of what you can achieve by working with stakeholders in this way. So we've seen different stakeholders. We've seen commercial fishermen, we've seen community groups in Arran, and now we're really working with recreational fishermen. But they're collecting a huge amount of data for us, and sometimes we're going on the boats as well. At this point, over 500 different fishing trips. Now, if I was a scientist wanting to charter my research vessel for 500 days at sea, it would cost millions. This this is largely being done for very, very small amount of money. We've also put acoustic tags on 50 pollocks, so we can get really fine scale detail about how they're moving, which can tell us about where the different stocks are and where fish are coming from to breed and all sorts of things like that, which will also help inform management. And we're working closely now with the management authorities to actually see this information used in future management decisions. But it's not only this sort of hard biological data, we're also running workshops with fishermen, both commercial and recreational. And we're also doing interviews, and we're looking at people's diaries, in some cases that back to the 1960s and 70s, to sort of recreate the history of these stocks and try and work out what's going on and what's caused these changes. So putting all of that together, I tried to come up with some key lessons learned from these 3 case studies. And I've done quite a few other projects like this as well. And I think the first lesson really, if you're a scientist, a manager, or if you're a conservationist, is when you're talking to stakeholders, before you do anything else, just listen, right? Be open-minded about their opinions, because you may not initially first agree with them. You may be tempted to go, hang on a minute, don't do that. Just sit back, listen, absorb, and be open-minded, and respect other people's opinions and concerns. If you think about it, stakeholders, whether they're people running wildlife, tourist boats, whether they're commercial or recreational fishermen, or whether they're just local residents, if you change the way that their local area of sea is managed or conserved, they're the ones who are going to be most affected. So you've really got to respect their opinions and concerns. You've also got to value their knowledge, right? A lot of these people are spending nearly every day at sea, certainly whenever the weather allows, which in the UK is maybe not as much as other parts in the world. But one of my colleagues, Simon Thomas, has coined this phrase, experts by experience. And I think this is a really great way to see stakeholders, because they really are, a lot of them, they know far more about the sea than me as a marine scientist ever could, because I unfortunately spend too much of my time tied to my laptop answering emails and not actually being out there and seeing firsthand what's going on. And then finally, aim for genuine collaboration. And what I mean by this is, if you're designing any sort of conservation initiative or data collection program, don't just listen to what people say and then go, right, I've come up with the way it's going to be done. Actually involve everyone at every step of the journey, so that you end up with something that's genuinely co-produced. So other than that, I'll just leave you with my little message that I like to leave people with. This is more of a personal one for you all. The philosophy of a scallop: to keep your eyes open, filter out the crap, grow a hard shell, but keep a soft heart. Be more scallop. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Bryce, thank you so much. What an amazing talk, and as well, what kind of a motivation for all the ECOPs out here to get started in conservation, or as well to proceed with the input you have given them. I just wanted to say thank you real quick. Really great job. I highly appreciate it. Please put in your questions in the chat, because we are really running short on time. I'm really sorry for that. But yeah, since this is a live hybrid event, we have some new contributions from our mojos, which Anmei is going to refer to. Bryce,
No
thank you
problem.
so much for your time. Thank you so much for your insights. Yeah, and
My
as well
pleasure.
for the last quote.
Please get in touch, anyone who wants to hear more or talk more. Cheers.
Yeah, I put your credentials in the chat. Thank you very much.